Welcome back, everybody. This is session 3 out of 5 of the mini course Food for Thought, the Torah of Eating, here at Web Yeshiva with me, Uri Cohen. And we are going back to uh, the framework that we started with a long time ago, 2 weeks ago. That is that of all the different things we could say about food, uh, most of what we'll be doing, hashkafa, halacha, most of the halacha topics, at least once in each session, not counting last week, relate to the way that the essay by Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik in the book Festival of Freedom, in which he gives 4 answers to the question of how can humans eating be better than animals eating? How can we be elevated? And we saw one of those, one of his approaches. We're going to look at another one shortly. His second answer to this question is that you can be better than animals when you eat if you have a sense of awe and a higher purpose. And it's not just a physical eating. There's something beyond that. As part of that, he writes something which we will see shortly in which will be source number 5 on this. This is a 3-page source sheet. Each page is about a different topic. So we'll be doing Berakhot and the attitude of gratitude. That's the first topic. That's going to be Rabbi Soloveitchik's one of his answers to this question. Then after that, we'll switch to talking about food and family on Shabbat, and then we'll move into a halacha topic, namely Mayim Achronim, and the approach that Mayim Achronim is a preparation for Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals. Anyway, so let's start. Berakhot and the attitude of gratitude. It's a great line. I think it's associated with Zig Ziglar, inspirational speaker. It rhymes in English. So the first subsection, excuse me, that food is not yours. There is a Gemara. It's a famous Gemara, but it still is a very radical Gemara, which is an agadic, non-halachic application or extension, non-halachic extension of a major halachic category. So just very briefly, the halacha category is here source number 1. The Rambam in the Mishnah Torah has an entire section called Hilchot Me'ila. Me'ila is not the kind of word that you see outside of Rabbinic Hebrew. The Rambam sums up the entire category, the entire section as follows. Asur lehedyot, it is forbidden for a regular person, meaning a non-Kohen, lehanot mikadshei Hashem, to benefit, to get benefit from the things that are that the halacha considers holy and dedicated to God. In other words, stuff that belongs to the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, stuff that is dedicated to the temple, that's set aside for the Kohanim, not for everybody else. Bain, whether it is Dvarim HaKrevim Al Gabe HaMizbeach, whether it is the animals and whatever else is brought is offered on the altar that belongs to God, Bain Mikadshe Bedek Habayit, or whether it's something that has been sanctified by being dedicated, donated to the temple, that's Bedek Habayit, is just like for upkeep. It doesn't matter. Once it belongs to the temple, it is off limits. And there's a separate halacha, which is a parallel to the halacha of gzela, theft. You're not allowed to steal from people. So me'ila is if you either take the item or otherwise get benefit from it, an item that belongs to God. That's me'ila. So the way the general rule that the Rambam sums up here is v'chol hanehene, anybody who gets benefit, b'shava pruta, even with a tiny amount, even a tiny bit of value. Shava pruta, well, it has to be worth a penny, whatever a penny was worth back in the times of when this halacha was formulated. Mikadshe Hashem, anybody who gets benefit inappropriately from that which is sanctified to God, ma'al. This person has violated one of the 613 mitzvot, and it's like they stole from God. He doesn't say that here, but in context, that's just the psukim. If we had a whole shiur, like there's literally an entire Masechet called an entire tractate of the Gemara, of the Mishnah and Gemara called Me'ilah. Why am I telling you this? Because the Gemara in Berakhot, in the context of we're obligated to say brachot, say blessings that the rabbis instituted before we eat anything, as well as before we get certain other types of benefit, as opposed to Birkat Hamazon, the official, the longer set of brachot for after eating bread. That there's a tradition that goes back to the Torah, and that the rabbis only added the later parts, but the obligation of Birkat Hamazon, that's on the Torah level. Brachot in general are rabbinic obligations. So in that context, the Gemara says something which is at first seems to be a halachic statement, and then as you go through it, it's clear that it is not a halachic statement, but it's still a very strong, a very emphatic way of putting it. Tana Rabbanan, Gemara Brachot Daf Lamed Hey. The rabbis taught, Asur lo adam sheyeheneh min ha'olam hazeh below bracha. It is forbidden. That sounds like it's a halacha. It's forbidden for a person to get benefit, hana'ah, from this world without first saying a bracha. That's a general rule. It is forbidden. B'chol haneh min ha'olam hazeh below bracha ma'al. And anybody who does get such benefit without saying a bracha, they have done me'ilah. We just said me'ilah is a violation of the Torah if you take it literally. Is this to be taken literally? Well, look at the next words. The next words make it pretty clear that this is a strong formulation in order to bring out the point, which we often find in Agadic sources. Rabbi Levi Rami. Rabbi Levi brought a contradiction between two sources, usually two psukim, usually two verses, although not always. There are two verses that contradict each other in Tehillim. Ketiv, one verse says, Lashem ha'aratz umlo'ah. This is, of course, the Shir Shel Yom for Sunday. It said when we put back the Torah on Shabbat morning, for God is the earth and everything in it. God owns the earth and everything in it. God owns everything. Okay, that's in Tehillim Chaf Daled. But there's another pasuk that says later in Tehillim Kuf Tet Vav that says Hashamayim Shamayim Ladonai v'Haaretz Natanu V'nei Adam. Oh yeah, we said that today in Hallel. Today was Rosh Chodesh. For some of you, it still is. Heaven is heaven of God, but the earth God gave to people. Well, which one is it? Does the earth belong to God or does it belong to people? Without even spelling out the question, it's clear that it's a question from the word Rami over here. That's the contradiction. So the Gemara answers, "Lo kasha, no problem. Kan kodem bracha, kan la'achar bracha." This one, literally here, one of these verses is talking about before you say a bracha, and the other is talking about after the bracha. And the simple understanding is that before you say a bracha on something that you are benefiting from, it doesn't belong to you. Only when you say it belongs to God. Only when you say the bracha does the ownership transfer from God to you. Ownership transfer also sounds halachic, but we're talking about psukim in Tehillim. Tehillim, as in general with Nevi'im and Ketuvim, they teach us values, but they, with rare exceptions, they do not teach us halacha. The Gemara goes on to say, Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa said, Kol haneh min olam hazeh b'lo bracha. Same formulation that we had over here a few lines ago. Anybody who benefits from this world without first saying a bracha, ki'ilu, it is as if Gozel, he is stealing. Well, Kadosh Baruch Hu u'knesset Yisrael. He's stealing from God, which we more or less said already with the word ma'al. He's stealing from God, and he's also stealing from the Jewish people. Wow, that's in one act, in one lack of an act, in one not saying the bracha, you are stealing from God and you're stealing from the Jews, from your entire people. Wow, how do you know that? How do you know that? Now, this is not going to be a source as much as it's a way to remember it. It's an asmachta. I wouldn't call this a proof, but like we said, these are ideas. These are agadot. Shnei, as it says in Mishlei, another source of values as opposed to halacha. Gozel aviv v'imo v'omer ein pasha. If somebody steals from his father and mother, wow, that's a really terrible thing on the from a moral perspective. If somebody steals from their father and mother and says, "Ein pasha," there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally fine. Chaver hu leish mashchit. He is a colleague. He is buddies with a destructive person, somebody who does uh, uh, does terrible things or sows destruction wherever he goes. Okay, what does that have to do with saying a bracha? Because Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa goes on to say, "Ve'ein aviv el HaKadosh Baruch Hu." In this pasuk, we should not take it literally. Father here is a reference to God. Shnei, as it says in Parshat Hazinu, "Halohu avicha kanecha." He, God, is your father who has acquired you. Okay. Ve'ein imo el Knesset Yisrael. And who's your mother in the pasuk about stealing from father and mother? That is the Jewish people. Really? A mother is a reference to the Jewish people? Yes. Shnei, as it says, one of the first psukim in Mishlei, Shma b'ni, listen, my child, Musar avicha, listen to the rebuke of or morality, but in context it's probably rebuke of your father. V'al titosh Torah imecha, and do not abandon the Torah of your mother, the ideas of your mother, the values of your mother. So, without this Gemara, I would have said this pasuk is talking about follow the values of your parents, and that is pshat. But this is not pshat. This is drash or remez. This is a homiletical way of reading the verses, which is, what does it mean to steal from one's father and mother? Who would even do such a thing? This is possibly one way of how they got to this interpretation. Nobody steals from their father and mother. It must be that this is talking about a metaphor. Someone who steals from God and the Jewish people, who are metaphorically considered your parents. Okay, well then, how do you steal? How do you steal from God? God owns everything. Even after you take it, it still belongs to God. No, it means getting improper use. If you get improper use of something, which is if you benefit from this world without saying a bracha, you are stealing from God, and you're also stealing from your people. It's not clear to me why, in what way it is stealing from your people, since presumably we're not talking about something that you, I don't know, you rob the charity box in the shul. It's presumably something that belongs to you halachically. Nevertheless, because you benefited from it without saying a bracha, you are doing something improper. You are improperly taking something that belongs to God, it belongs to the Jewish people. So you could argue, maybe there are better interpretations, but you could argue that this last statement of Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa is expanding what we started with here at the beginning of source number 2, and saying, you think that stuff belongs to you? No. Before you say a bracha, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to God. And it belongs to the Jewish people. You're just a member of the Jewish people. We collectively own what all of us as individuals own. You want to make use of it? Well, then you have to ask permission. And by saying a bracha, you're asking permission of God and the Jewish people. That's a pretty radical idea. That not only do we say, okay, well, people, we don't have anything except that God gives it to us, but that everything you own or you think you own belongs to the Jewish people as well as God. That's an unusual idea. I've not heard anybody elaborate on this. So this is the basic source in the Gemara, not a halachic source, but still teaches us values. That until you make a bracha, it's not just, well, you should say a bracha because it's required. The rabbis made a rule. No. It's also immoral. There's something wrong with benefiting from something that isn't fully yours. How do you make it yours? By saying blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. Berakhot Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, and then Shahakol Niyeh Bidvaro, or Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, Borei Pri Agafen, whatever the appropriate blessing is. Until you do that, it isn't yours. It's like you're asking permission to use it. That's a very unusual idea because it doesn't sound like that from the words. The words are blessed are you. I'm saying shevach. I'm praising God. God, you are blessed. I'm praising you. Maybe I'm thanking you. But asking permission? Yes, that's what this Gemara is saying. Yes, a bracha on food or spices or whatever other thing you're benefiting from is asking permission. And this this leads us into what's going to be the Rabbi Soloveitchik's answer to the original question, how people can be better than animals in eating. But let's formulate it a little bit differently. What do Birkat Hamazon and Asher Yatzar have in common? As I mentioned before, Birkat Hamazon is what we say after eating even a very small olive size amount of bread. Obligated to say these four blessings. Asher Yatzar, that's the bracha that is said after going to the bathroom, after using the facilities. There is a very nice poster, which is I've seen this, and here it is. You've seen this? A bunch of schools or shuls have this up on the wall. It has the text of Asher Yatzar, but it's illustrated with pictures, and don't take life for granted. Stop for a moment to seriously think about the wondrous and miraculous nature of the human body. And it's cute little pictures, but it actually brings a very very nice idea, which is that it would be a very major problem if we couldn't go to the bathroom, if our excretion were not working properly. Okay, but what does that have to do with Birkat Hamazon? So take a look at the couple of sources that I found that address this issue. Well, the first one's more about Berakhot, but it's going to lead into it. Rabbi Chuck Davidson, who's known for a bunch of things, but probably these days most best known for being one of the rabbis who engages in civil disobedience in Israel by marrying couples without registering them with the chief rabbinate in order to object to some of the policies of the chief rabbinate. And anyway, there's a lot to say about that. That's what he's known for. So he just mentioned this on his Facebook page, which I saw because one of my Facebook friends shared it. I once heard a Haredi Rav give a great shiur on chinuch, on education. He was asked if one should teach one's children first to daven, to pray, and only afterwards to say brachot, or vice versa. Well, you're teaching both, but which one comes first? So this wise rabbi said brachot should come first. A bracha is an expression of hakarat hatov, gratitude, whereas tefillah, prayer in general, is primarily a request for something. Not all prayers are requests for things, but a lot of them are. Teach your kids first and foremost how to have hakarat hatov, how to have gratitude for what they have, and only afterwards to ask for more, he said. And this fits very well with the formulation. It's not on the source sheet, from Rabbi Dr. Mark Gelman, known for being the rabbi of the God Squad of Newsday in New York. He's the rabbi emeritus of Temple Beth Torah in Melville, New York. So he has this line, which he's written a bunch of times, that there are only 4 basic prayers: gimme, thanks, oops, and wow. Those 4 one-syllable words cover all the tefillot and all the types of prayer. Wow, that's prayers of praise and wonder. Oops is asking for forgiveness. Gimme is a request in Hebrew, bakasha. So wow is shevach. Oops is slicha or vidui. Gimme is a bakasha, a request, and thanks is hoda'ah or hakarat hatov. So that the way that the Rabbi Gelman formulates it is that, look, there are different types of prayer, but of these types of prayer, meaning brachot and tefillah in general, these are two different types of prayer. So going back to what Rabbi Davidson quoted this other rabbi is saying, which one should come first? And the answer is the one about hakarat tov, namely blessings that involve thanking God for things, or in effect, thanking God, thank you for letting me eat this bread. Thank you for giving me permission to eat this food. That ties in with what we just saw from the Gemara. And there's from a very different angle, not so different, but is a book by Dennis Prager. I'm holding it right here. Happiness is a Serious Problem. Dennis Prager is famous for being a politically conservative talk show host who's written a lot of stuff. He makes a point, last I checked anyway, he makes a point of not being orthodox, but of being traditional. And this book has a lot of good ideas, and this is one of them. Source number 4. Yes, there is a secret to happiness. It's gratitude. All happy people are grateful. Ungrateful people cannot be happy. We tend to think it's being unhappy that leads people to complain, but it's truer to say it's complaining that leads to people becoming unhappy. Become grateful and you will become a much happier person. And then he goes on to say that gratitude is largely dependent upon, we have not said this yet, receiving what we do not expect to receive. You might have hoped for something, but you didn't expect it. That's why when we give children so much that they come to expect more and more, people use the expression spoiled. What does it mean to spoil a child? We actually deprive them of the ability to be happy because they have less and less gratitude. Meaning the problem of spoiling children is not giving them too much. It's giving them too much without inculcating them at the same time the value of gratitude. And that's why it's so important to teach children to say thank you, not only because it's the decent thing to do, which is a classic way of formulating it, and the source that we said until now, like what's the right thing to do to say the bracha, but because saying the words thank you inculcates gratitude in the person saying them. So even just for your own sake, this is one of many examples of something where like it's not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also good for you, which is a certain style of presentation that we find especially in sources especially in circles where the rabbi or author or speaker is talking to people who don't start with the assumption that there is a God and God gave us the Torah and you're obligated to keep it. So how do you, if you're starting from a different assumption where you can't assume that people agree with that, so how do you try to convince people to keep the Torah, to keep mitzvot, to keep traditional values? And the answer is you explain to them how it's good for them. It's not a contradiction. They might both be true. Could be you should do it because it's the right thing to do, and possibly God told us to, our ancestors told us to, our rabbis told us to, and also because it's good for you. And this would be an example of that as well. And he says, and what are his two examples of how, this is one of many reasons that religion, when done correctly, is important to happiness because it inculcates gratitude. Two examples from Dennis Prager. One, people who give thanks to God before each meal regularly inculcate gratitude in themselves. So this is a different but not contradictory reason why we should say brachot before we eat, not just because it's the right thing to do and you shouldn't be stealing, but also because it inculcates gratitude. And what's his second example? Judaism even has a blessing over relieving the body. Can you believe that? He didn't talk to somebody who isn't familiar with traditional Judaism and tell them that not only do we say grace after meals and blessings before meals, we even say a blessing after we go to the bathroom. Mind blown. If somebody's not already familiar with that, that seems really, really unusual. It is pretty unusual. But Dennis Prager did not make this up. This comparison of Berakhot Hamazon to Asher Yatzar. Rabbi Soloveitchik says it in this essay that we've been going through. Asher Yatzar. The very instant that one begins to ponder the enigma of man, the mystery of life, the paradox of an organism sustained through feeding, then eating ceases to be a vulgar mechanical function and it is shifted to a service of God. So Rav Soloveitchik starts by talking about thanking God and being amazed at God's creation of us as functioning bodies as part of being people. And he segues straight from that into, and then your attitude when you eat. He's not talking about, in that sentence, he's not talking about saying a bracha that's going to be coming up, but he's talking about being amazed at my body works. My digestive system works. That's something to contemplate. When you contemplate that then the eating becomes avodat Hashem. And then he applies it to brachot. And he says, saying the blessings prior to the meal and Berakhot Hamazon after it, gives expression to our gratitude to God for his loving kindness, for his mercy. Wherever God lets his chesed descend upon us, man stands perplexed and amazed. When man thanks God, he ipso facto, by that fact itself, admits that he did not merit, he did not deserve the grace that God has showered upon him. And in the Thanksgiving service, which is a fancy way of saying, we say modim, we say thank you, God, in every Amidah. Wonderstruck man, what a great phrase. Wonderstruck man lifts his hand in reverence and awe and praises God for the great mystery he experiences, the mystery of being. So it's interesting that for Rabbi Soloveitchik, it is gratitude, but it's gratitude that is also tied into a sense of awe. This doesn't take away from what Dennis Prager said. It's just saying the same thing and then moving it in a different direction. The idea of being amazed, the idea of having wonder. This is associated with Rabbi Abram Joshua Heschel. His term for spiritual wonder is radical amazement. And I read a book a couple of years ago. No, actually, just last year. Not by Rabbi Heschel, but by somebody else who embodied that approach. I thought it was pretty impressive. I'm sharing an Amazon page right now. It's called One Long River of Song, Notes on Wonder by Brian Doyle. Brian Doyle, who passed away just a few years ago, was a prolific writer, fiction, nonfiction. He was Catholic. This is a posthumous collection of essays, and it's an unusual style because whatever he writes about, whether it's something when he was a kid or as a parent, or just going to the forest and watching the birds, everything that he writes about, he's so excited, and he conveys the sense of awe and amazement and gratitude, and yes, he is doing it from a sense of religion. You don't have to be religious to get that, to agree with his approach, but it's so rare to see that I was very impressed with that. By the way, why did I decide to read this book? Because I had previously read Brian Doyle's one of his earlier books about reading and books, and I enjoyed that a lot. And that was called, one second, might as well just tell you the title of that too. Reading in Bed, brief headlong essays about books and writers and reading and readers. That's the book by the earlier book that I read by Brian Doyle. Okay, moving right along to our second hashkafa topic. Really, it's a sociological topic: food and family on Shabbat. So there's a classic Gemara. Let's go right to source number 2. There's a classic Gemara that says Shabbat makes the food taste better. Really? Yes, that's what it says. It's a story. As with many Agadic Gemaras, the story, the value is conveyed not through a lecture, but through a story. What somebody said in a story. Amar lo Caesar, the Caesar, as in the Roman emperor, said, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, to Rabbi Yeshua, Mipnei ma, why is it that Tavshil shel Shabbat foods that you Jews make, Recho Nodef, it has this amazing aroma. It smells so good. Why does your Shabbat food smell so good? Okay. Amar lo, so Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania answered, Tavlin echad yesh lanu. We have this one spice. We have this amazing spice. The Shabbat Shemo. It's called Shabbat. Presumably, the Caesar already knew that Shabbat was the name of the day. But he's saying, speaking metaphorically, because there is no spice called Shabbat. We have a spice called Shabbat. Shana metiwin w'tocho. We throw that into the food. V'rechono def, and that makes the food smell so good. Amar lo, the emperor said to him, ten lanu hemenuk. Give us that amazing spice. I want our food to smell so good as well. And the rabbi answered, sorry, emperor. Kom shomer hashabbat. Anybody who keeps Shabbat, mo'il lo. It works. It works to make the food taste better. V'she'eno mishamer hashabbat eno mo'il lo. But if somebody does not keep Shabbat, like you, because nothing personal, but you're not Jewish, you don't keep Shabbat. People don't keep Shabbat. It doesn't work. This is a very unusual Gemara because what's so special about Shabbat food? Well, there's a mitzvah of kavod Shabbat, of honoring Shabbat. There's a mitzvah of oneg Shabbat. We discussed that a little bit last week, enjoying Shabbat. But like that Shabbat food is objectively smells better, tastes better, so much so that a pagan like the emperor knew or heard that or maybe just smelled that Shabbat food smells so good, saying no, the food is that good only if you keep Shabbat. Meaning, like anybody can make make food on the weekend, and really most people who don't keep Shabbat, they're not warming up their food overnight, right? That's only relevant for people who are keeping Shabbat and can't cook on Saturday. But still, you could theoretically have answered that question and say, okay, I'll give you our recipes. I'll give you our recipes for cholent or whatever else the food is that we heat up over Shabbat. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya doesn't go that way. He cuts that off and says, nope, the food tastes good because we keep Shabbat. There's something about keeping Shabbat that makes the food taste better. Not clear exactly, at least from the story, it's not clear what exactly the connection is, but that's an intriguing idea, and that fits with the story that is told, probably an apocryphal story, but still a good story, told by the Ben Ish Chai, major rabbi from Baghdad, died in 1909, and a few of his writings have been translated into English. He was very prolific, and the Ben Ish Chai Haggadah is one of them. It's a collection of stuff that he wrote in a bunch of contexts. The story is told of a Jew who wanted to become a Muslim. And according to the Muslims, at least at that time, a rabbi had to come and try to convince him to change his mind. If the Jew remained stubborn, insisted on converting, okay, that was a sign that the Jew really wanted to become Muslim with all his heart and soul. Okay, that's an interesting policy. So a Jewish sage was invited to come and speak to the would-be convert. He gave clear and logical explanations, magnificent reasons, impressive sermons and proofs, but all to no avail. The Jew insisted on his mutiny. He closed his heart. His decision was ironclad. He was going to convert to Islam. But before the rabbi despaired and left, one of the man's friends arrived. And this friend knew that since childhood, this man had always loved the taste of eggs cooked in chamin, Iraqi equivalent of cholent. And this guy who was about to convert, he could eat 6, 7, or 8 of them at a time. That's a lot of eggs. The friend told the man, if you convert, where will you get Shabbat eggs? How about that? As soon as the man heard he would no longer be able to eat his favorite dish, he changed his mind about converting. Which is a funny story, but it conveys the point that not everything about our Judaism, about our Jewish lifestyle, not everything is straight halacha. A lot of it is the associations. So this guy, he couldn't make an egg himself? He couldn't make stew with an egg? It wouldn't be the same. If you're not keeping Shabbat, now this story is not the same as the Gemara in source number 2, but it fits in with it. If somebody's not keeping Shabbat, it's just not the same. So Shabbat, why do we keep Shabbat? We keep Shabbat because God said so. That's true. But Shabbat is also for us. Shabbat is kavod. We honor Shabbat, and through Shabbat, we honor God. But oneg is for us. That's not just something we do for God. We what are you supposed to do was for Oneg Shabbat, as we said last week. Think of what's your favorite food and eat that for Oneg Shabbat. That's not because God said so. That's because God or the rabbis, they want us to enjoy Shabbat. And this leads us to the family part. So there's this classic book um, going back to 1981. I have it right here. The 9 Questions People Ask About Judaism, co-written by Dennis Prager, whom we saw before, and Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, an Orthodox rabbi who went on to write a lot of other books. And they have a few pages about Shabbat, and I like the way that they formulate what's so special about Shabbat. This is just one of the several things they say about Shabbat. I ended up using this the one time that my wife and I, when we were on Shlichut in Syracuse, we were asked to give a mini series on like introduction to basic Judaism at a I don't remember if it was Reconstructionist or unaffiliated synagogue, just like introduction to traditional Judaism. And there were a bunch of synagogue members there, but there were also a bunch of evangelical Christians who came to hear what is traditional Judaism, understand their religion through our religion. And I think we did a pretty good job. One of the things that we did in explaining Shabbat was to present this. The Shabbat laws, by prohibiting technological companionship, compel us to seek human companionship. That's an interesting formulation. The Shabbat meals are a typical example in which the participants sing and speak for hours on end. Okay, the speaking is not required, but you could, whether you're speaking words of Torah or other things, singing is a value. Not every Orthodox family does this, but for the ones who do, like there are a bunch of songs that are part of enjoying the Shabbat meal, and it's not just eating, it's being with your family, and it's spending time with them and singing with them. Unlike the rest of the week, no one has another appointment to run to at the end of the meal. Parents and children relate better in a family that observes Shabbat. And as regards the husband-wife relationship, the benefits of Shabbat are profound. They're like telescoping a lot of stuff in here, but notice this was written in 1981. That was a long time before smartphones. That was even before kids would sit at the table during the week playing handheld video games. Actually, I think that was the very beginning, early 80s. But now that we do have something that everybody has, most of us have in our hands, that is a temptation. And a lot of families, unfortunately, can't get away from that, that one or more of the people are on their phone at the table. If you keep Shabbat, at least during the Shabbat meals, nobody's on their phone. Wow. How do you do that? And the answer is you keep Shabbat. That doesn't mean the reason we keep Shabbat is to get closer to our family. We keep Shabbat because it's a very important mitzvah. Way back in the Perek Aleph of Breshit, in the Aseret Dibrot, the 10 Commandments, Shabbat is really, really important. The Torah talks about it over and over and over again. We keep Shabbat because it's very important to God and the Torah. But it turns out that just like in this Gemara, one of the benefits of keeping Shabbat is the food tastes better. So it turns out that one of the benefits of keeping Shabbat is you can spend one day a week, getting closer with your family, spending time with your family without any technology separating you. That's a big deal. It's a much bigger deal than it was when they wrote this book. Fascinating idea. I'll just mention briefly to wrap up this topic, a paper written by Joel Guberman, who is the co-founder and director of the Patil Tchelet Association. They're the ones who make the tchelet. If you've seen anybody in your communities wearing the light blue fringes for tzitzit, that's them. He wrote this essay for Atid, which does not exist anymore, but existed for a number of years, the Academy for Torah Initiatives and Directions. Atid was the forerunner of WebYeshiva. So it all comes together, meaning Rabbi Jeffrey Sachs, the founder and director of WebYeshiva, Atid was his previous project. So a paper that Joel Guberman wrote for Atid, Chicken Soup for the Shabbat Table, Improving Jewish Family Learning and Dynamics, he, as part of his writing about the subject, the Shabbat table, he gave a questionnaire to a bunch of Israeli and Olim families of different backgrounds and asked them about their Shabbat meals. They talked about togetherness. What was so great about Shabbat meals was togetherness. And yes, the kids all insist, one of the families said, the kids all insist that the food tastes better, the soup tastes better on Shabbat. Probably those kids had not learned the Gemara that we saw earlier, but they agreed with it. And he concludes, there's little doubt that Shabbat and holidays, and particularly the family meal times connected with these events, have been a major factor in maintaining the family's significance and centrality among the children of Israel. Meaning even before we had the issue of smartphones, somebody was working all week and too busy to see their family. If you keep Shabbat, you're not too busy on Shabbat. That's not why we keep Shabbat, but it's one more benefit to be able to reconnect with your family, with your spouse, with your children, and if it makes the food taste better, that's great. Okay, we're now up to our halacha topic. Mayim achronim is preparation for Birkat Hamazon. There's a lot to say about Mayim achronim. This is a basic one-page overview. For those of you who were in the myth-busting class, I did not do this as a separate myth-busting topic, but it came up in the discussion during one of the classes. Basically, it took me a while to figure this out because usually when halachically observant Jews talk about Mayim achronim, they usually present only the approach that they know. And there are two major approaches within the sources. But a lot of people are not aware that besides the one that they were taught, there's also another one. Here are the two opinions. They're both in the Shulchan Aruch. One's at the beginning of the Siman, Orach Chaim Kuf Pei Aleph, and one's near the end. The Shulchan Aruch starts out by saying, Mayim achronim chova. The washing your hands, meaning after you finish eating the meal that you've done until you're dying for, you ate bread, but before you're going to say Birkat Hamazon, you're obligated to wash your hands ritually. And then he goes into the details of that, which we're not doing right now. And then at the end of that siman, he says, Yesh, there are some she'eino agim, we told Mayim achronim, where their custom is not to do it. But even within that halachic approach, we'll see the source of that shortly. If somebody is, well, he uses a very harsh word, istinus, spoiled, finicky. I would prefer to say delicate. If somebody's so delicate that they are in the habit of washing their hands after a meal, separate from a religious obligation, if you're going to wash your hands anyway after you eat, why would you do that? Presumably because your hands are dirty. You've got some food on your hands, so you can't walk around with food on your hands. You're going to wash your hands. If you're like that, well then, you consider your hands dirty after eating? Well, then in that case, you had better wash your hands before Birkat Hamazon. You're going to wash them anyway? Do it before Birkat Hamazon. That's the stringency within this lenient approach. But it turns out that the two reasons, the two approaches, you're obligated, you're not obligated, they both go back to the Gemara. There are two different Gemaras. One of them is in Gemara Berakhot, Daf Nun Gimel, that's here in source number 2, and one of them is Gemara Chulin, Daf Kuf Hey. There's a lot to say about these Gemaras. I'm just going to do bits and pieces of them. Yadayim mezuhamot psulot lebracha. It's an interesting formulation. It doesn't say you're obligated to wash your hands after the meal. It's dirty hands are disqualified from making the bracha. And what's the beginning of the sentence? Kishem shemizuham pasul avoda. The same way that if a Kohen is dirty, he is not allowed to do the avoda, the divine service in the Beit HaMikdash. So too, if your hands are dirty, you're not allowed to say Birkat Hamazon. Fascinating comparison. Birkat Hamazon is compared to the avoda. You are serving God now. If you take this seriously, this is an official, formal service of God, well then, you don't do it when you're dirty. Okay, so if your hands are dirty, then point is, according to this opinion, it's not about um, it's not about the ritual of my machronim. It's about your hands need to be clean for Birkat Hamazon. And to make it clear that this is not necessarily physical uncleanliness, although it sounds like so far that it is physical. But look at the way it's formulated after this in the Gemara. V'hit kadishtem, there's a pasuk that says, V'hit kadishtem, you should make yourselves holy and be holy, because I, God, am holy. So it seems kind of redundant. So the Gemara says, presumably on the level of remez, because these are all rabbinic obligations, not Torah obligations. V'hit kadishtem, what does it mean to sanctify yourselves? Elu mayim rishonim, these are the first waters. That's what we call netilat yadayim. You're obligated to wash your hands ritually before you eat bread. V'yitem kedoshim, and when the pasuk then says, and be holy, elu mayim achronim, you're obligated to wash your hands ritually after you eat bread. According to this approach, it's not so much about Birkat Hamazon. It's washing your hands ritually before you eat and washing your hands ritually after you eat. But it's not that you have to wash your hands. It's that either your hands must be clean for Birkat Hamazon, or the ritual is to wash your hands before and after you eat bread. And then Ani Hashem Elokechem zo bracha. That's the blessing of Birkat Hamazon. So according to this reason, Mayim Achronim is an obligation. If you eat bread, you washed your hands beforehand. There's a parallel obligation to wash your hands afterwards. And the opinion that's presented first in the Shulchan Aruch is based on this. But what's the other opinion based on? That you don't have to wash your hands after you eat bread, after the meal. That's in source number 3. Mayim Rishonim mitzvah, ve'achronim chova. Washing your hands before you eat bread, that's a mitzvah. But washing your hands afterwards is an obligation. Wait, isn't a mitzvah an obligation? No, Rashi explains here it's better than a mitzvah, or maybe it's stronger than a mitzvah, meaning the rabbis made an official mitzvah. Asher kiddushan b'mitzvotav etzvana al netilat yadayim. That's the washing before the meal. Obligation afterwards is technically not a mitzvah, but you have to do it anyway. Why do you have to do it anyway? So the Gemara answers, a different reason. We haven't seen this yet. The reason the Mayim Achronim is an obligation is because there's such a thing as melach sidomit, which they translate as salt from Sodom, which literally blinds the eyes, and some translate this to mean it irritates the eyes, because literally blinding the eyes, it doesn't seem to fit with anything that we're familiar with, even from Talmudic times. And Rashi adds, since there's a value of having salt on your table when you eat, just like there was salt on every carbon, and the table is that we eat on is like the shulchan, the table of God. We'll talk about this more next week. So since you have salt on the table, if the salt that you have is something that you can eat, but that it would be corrosive to have in your eyes, and if you have it on your hands afterwards, that's a practical reason. It's not a mitzvah. It's an obligation, the same way that it's an obligation to wash your hands before you touch something that it would be bad to touch it if your hands are dirty. It's just a simple practical thing. So according to this reason, do you have to do it today? No. Tosfot says this in source number 4. We, nowadays, modern times, the 1100s, or whenever Tosfot is writing, 1100s, maybe 1200s, we don't have this salt anymore, and so we don't wash our hands after Birkat Hamazon. After eating before Birkat Hamazon. Since we don't wash our hands anyway, because who cares that you might have some salt on your hand, you might have some food on your hand, so what? Since we don't wash your hands anyway, therefore we're not obligated to wash your hands before Birkat Hamazon. However, Tosfot says, that thing that we saw before in the Shulchan Aruch, Tosfot says this too. This is part of the lenient opinion. If there are anashim me'unagim, there's that negative word, a different negative word, spoiled people. People who are sensitive. Sensitive and delicate, nice words. People are don't like having food on their hands, and they, in any case, are going to wash their hands after a meal. For them, they're not allowed to say Birkat Hamazon before washing hands. That's within the lenient opinion. Okay, a lot of people are not aware of this. A lot of people, especially in non-Orthodox circles, were told we don't do Mayim Achronim. That's correct. You don't have to do Mayim Achronim except if you're in a situation in which you would be washing your hands anyway. In which case, you're obligated to wash your hands before you finish the meal. But this is really not so well known. If you've heard of Melech Tzedom, you've probably heard of Tosfot, but you probably haven't heard of this. Source number 5, I only heard of it as an adult. Rav Yaakov Emden, rabbi in Germany in the 1700s, in his separate book commentary on the Torah called Mor Uktzia, he quotes Tosfot. He quotes the Torah quoting Tosfot, and he says, "I don't think that's a good reason not to do. I don't think that's a good reason to do or not to do. To make a distinction between then and now." He says, "I've got a better distinction between then, the time of the Gemara, and now, the 1700s, and that is, at the time of the Gemara and much of human history, people ate with their hands, without cutlery. In which case, when you finished the meal, you had food on your hands. The only question is, do you have to wash the food off your hands before Birkat Hamazon or not? If you're the kind of person who would be washing your hands because you don't like having food on your hands, then you have to wash it before Birkat Hamazon. But he says, we're modern people in the 1700s. We no longer hold the food in our hands. Most people. That's why we don't have to do Mayim Achronim, because we don't have food on our hands. The whole point of Mayim Achronim, this, by the way, is not according to Gemara Berakhot source 2, but the Gemara in Chulin source 3. The whole reason of washing your hands for Mayim Achronim is because your hands are dirty in some way or other. So the Gemara gave an example of that particular salt. We don't have that salt, but our hands are still dirty unless you're using cutlery. If you're using cutlery, then you don't have to wash your hands. And then he goes on to say, and maybe that's why women today in the 1700s who are istanisot, who have manners, have more manners than the men apparently, they don't do Mayim Achronim. Even in families where the men do, the women don't. Why? Because the women are more sensitive to having food on their hands. But it all depends on whether you have food on your hands. If you don't have food on your hands, you certainly don't have to do Mayim Achronim. And that's a distinction between then and now. They used to have food on their hands because they ate with their hands, and we don't. That's Rav Yaakov Emden. Having said that, despite that interesting theory, maybe that was true in the 1700s in Germany, but these days, it's hard to argue that women are less likely, women are less likely to walk around with food on their hands than men. I guess it depends on where you are, but in general, all the reasons that are given, despite what we just said from Rav Emden, all the reasons that people give for doing Mayim Achronim, whether it's the washing before Birkat Hamazon, or doing the ritual hand washing before and after you eat bread, both of which are in source number 2, or whether it's the getting the food off your hands, or whether it's Kabbalistic reasons, which we haven't even addressed, there should be no reason to distinguish between women and men. Meaning, either you follow the opinion that women and men are obligated in Mayim Achronim, or you follow the opinion that women and men are not obligated in Mayim Achronim. The weird thing is, in many families and communities within the Orthodox world, men pass around Mayim Achronim and women don't, or men go to the sink to do Mayim Achronim and women don't, which is very weird. And the people who've spoken out about this include Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, Rav Ovadia Yosef. He said there's no difference between women and men. The way that Rav Auerbach puts it, as quoted here in Halichot Bat Yisrael, source number 6, B'mkom shenoagin ha'anashim lito gam al hanashim lanhog kain. If there's a place that women that the men are doing Mayim Achronim, the women have to also. Meaning, you don't have to wash your hands because you can roll after eating bread, but after you had the meal, but before Birkat Hamazon, if you want to rely on Tosfot. But if they're passing around Mayim Achronim, so apparently the people at this table, they're following the opinion of doing Mayim Achronim. Okay, so then women and men should both do Mayim Achronim. So I've been places where they look at the woman who doesn't pass the little mini bucket, but she does it herself. Like, I'm too polite to say anything, but who does she think she is? She's following the halacha. That's something that a lot of people are not aware of. Dr. Joel Olowski, writing in his book about women and halacha, argues that this is based, women not doing it is based on a mistake, that women are not part of the zimun. They are part of the zimun. And he says traditionalists should be pressing women to undertake a neglected ritual rather than discouraging those who would opt for participation. So somebody says, "What? Women don't have to do Mayim Achronim?" They're just talking out of ignorance. It's not based on knowledge. It's based on their assumption that they haven't seen women doing it. I guess women don't have to do it, but that's not correct. You want to say that the men in a given family are very strict and the women are not. Well, that would be nice if it were true, but I don't think that is the case. Anyway, we are done with the halacha topic, and now let's move on to recipes. Yay! As I mentioned last week, we're doing and the previous week, we're doing the recipes for this week's Parsha on Israel. I uploaded to the website the recipes for Parsha Korach for those of you who are still going to read that this week. A lot of people associate Parsha Chukat with Paraduma, the red cow. Okay, so what do you do that's associated with the red cow? So, well, you could serve cans of Red Bull energy drink. That would be the perhaps more expensive but less bother way of doing something, and that's not just red, it's Red Bull. That's it. That's Paraduma. Okay, that would be Par Adom, but okay, close enough. Other people try do something with, let's say over here, red velvet cake. So this particular recipe from a suggestion from Stephanie Backman Savier. She made a trifle like a pudding thing, and she put red velvet cake crumbled on the bottom to represent the ashes of the paraduma. Okay, that is definitely creative. And somebody else made red velvet cupcakes topped with little squares from the chocolate cow. The elite chocolate bars that each one has a little cow on it. That's a good combo. If you have a red velvet cupcake recipe, so then put the cows on top. And this one. Now, moving on to other topics, two more topics in Parshat Chukah. One of them is that Moshe hit the rock and water came out, even though he's supposed to speak to the rock. Okay, this really impressed me. Okay, this is she didn't the person who did this, Faggy Vault, who posts regularly in the Parsha Desserts Facebook group. She didn't explain how she did it, but apparently some kind of cupcake topped with candy rocks and something that looks like flowing water. That's pretty good. I've seen a lot of bad imitations of water in the
Your sound went away. I lost your sound. I don't know if anybody else lost their sound. Yes, I see shaking your head lost the sound too. And he doesn't seem to hear me either.
effort than the previous one.
Okay. You lost your sound. We didn't
Oh
hear the
no.
last few minutes.
Oh,
And
really?
Rebecca's
Starting?
shaking her head that 2
Oops.
minutes that we didn't hear anything you said the last
Oops.
2 minutes. Just so you know.
Sorry about that.
Not your
I
fault.
Thank you.
I'm glad
I got
Rebecca
him.
has some pictures. So I see she's shaking her head, agreeing with me. Okay.
Okay. Well, here the good news is, if we lost the sound, it was at the part of the session in which a picture's worth 1,000 words, and we had the
Okay.
and then you could look at it on your own afterwards.
Okay. Yeshikol to you. Thank you very much. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you. Thank you. You too. Thanks to everybody for joining me. Oh, it's just any questions, comments? Mark asked, if Melch Sodom poses a risk, should you be equally concerned if you've had a mizonot meal? So no, meaning the obligation. Uh, let's put it this way: it's not that we still have melech sidomit. The people who are still doing melech, who are still doing my machronim, are presumably not thinking about melech sidomit at all. They're presumably thinking about the Gemara and Brachot, whether preparation for Birkat Hamazon or a parallel ritual of hand washing before and after the meal. If you follow the Melch Sidomit Gemara, then presumably you wouldn't have to do it, except, as Tosfot indicates, the Gemara, and this is for this, what I'm about to say, I think this Tosfot is very important, even if you don't follow it, that the Gemara that says Melch Sidomit is not saying it's only about Melch Sidomit. The Gemara is saying if you have something on your hands that you want to get off, that you want to wash off, then you're obligated to wash it off before Birkat Hamazon. Meaning Melch Sidomit is not just about Melch Sidomit, even according to Tosfot. And I did not realize that when I first heard about this Tosfot. I thought, oh, Tosfot is just giving us a reason why nobody has to do my Machronim anymore. Actually, no. As we saw, Tosfot, in the text of Tosfot, explains when the obligation applies. So yes, so I wouldn't. We're not worried. Nobody's actually doing my machronim today because of Melch Sidomit, unless you read that Gemara on the metaphorical level. In case anybody's interested, there's a Chabad English commentary on the Siddur from a couple of decades ago called My Prayer, 2 volumes, and in the section on my machronim, it gives an approach which I don't know. Maybe there's a classic Chabad approach. I never heard anybody say it before or after, and that is that the Melch Sidomit is a metaphor. What does it mean to have the salt of Sodom on your hands? It means to eat like the people in Sodom. And the people in Sodom were people who hated helping people. So the idea is that Melch Sidomit is your meal has Melch Sidomit, nothing to do with the food you eat, but if you're the kind of people who don't help anybody else, you only help yourself, then that's like having the salt of Sodom, and therefore the water reminds us. I forgot how that works, but that's taking Melch Sidomit and trying to elevate it from an explanation that doesn't work anymore to something that can still work on the metaphorical level. Okay, now I'm gonna look at Rebecca's question. My husband, who's from Southern California, likes to joke that all middle class and upper class people in California are Istinists. But is it really a joke? Does it really have halachic implications? People here are used to flowing water, indoor plumbing, abundant food, lovely temperatures, at least in the coastal areas. Could this really make people a halachic category of Istinists? So it would seem that there isn't a separate category of Istinists. It's more like that there are certain halachot in which somebody who's an Istinist is treated differently by the rabbis who came up with that halacha. So, although in the case we just said, it would seem that it's not that the rabbis decided, according to the way the Tosfot puts it, is we're not telling you what to do, but if you're the kind of person who's going to wash your hands anyway, then you have to wash it before Birkat Hamazon. It's not really a separate obligation. Or rather, that explains why the Gemara says, my machronim is a chovah. Why is it an obligation? It's not a mitzvah, it's a chovah. Because it's you. You have self-imposed the obligation by caring about the food that's on your hands. That's not on God or the rabbis. That's on you. We have, let's say for Sukkot, if somebody's mitzta'er, if somebody is suffering in the sukkah, then they're exempt from being in the sukkah. And then the whole discussion is, what counts as mitztayer and different interpretations of that. So technically, that's not called istinus, but that's not the point. It's another example of it. But yes, the fact that many of us are used to certain things might very well have different applications. Not so much that we're in a separate category. It's not like, I don't know, what's a halacha category? Mechalel Shabbat b'fer hesia. Somebody violates Shabbat in public. That's a halacha category. This is not so much a halacha category, but as much as that certain halachot are applied differently. What would be another example of a halacha that's applied differently? Well, let's see. Indoor plumbing. Oh,
And
right.
part
So,
of it is like sukkahs, but your example there is an excellent example because like I mean people make jokes, but like people from LA really expect like the temperature should be between like 65 and 75 degrees year round. That's what they think. So like you'll be sitting there and it'll start drizzling, and my husband will be like, it's drizzling in the sukkah. And I'm like, from Baltimore. So I'm like, oh no, this is nice. At least it's not a downpour. So, there's, if there's lightning, we go, so it's just interesting because he makes jokes about it, but like there really is a certain kind of delicacy of being like, also like, I mean, like things like what is considered difficult, like food wise, like Californians are used to having like produce year round and like all sorts of just things that other people do not. It's just interesting to me. Like, yeah, I mean, like, what can you eat outside of sukkah? Those are just different things. It turns into this whole whatever. It's just funny. So basically, it's a case by case thing. If it's you don't be like they are now in this category and it's forever. Also, like things like sleeping on the floor on Tisha B'av, just like there's things like you read, and there's categories they list it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just
yeah.
funny. So you're saying it's not
Yeah.
a whole
Okay.
category. You take it one by
Actually,
one. Yeah.
right. No, no. Right. So yes, each halacha would be separate. Let's say, since you mentioned Tisha B'av, right? One of the halacha that you'll find in the Shulchan Aruch is that you should enjoy yourself less on Tisha B'av. So if you usually sleep with 2 pillows, you should sleep with 1. Okay. Notice it doesn't say don't use a pillow on Tisha B'av. The assumption is that most people still need a pillow. But I can see, I've never actually had this situation, but I can see somebody saying, Rabbi, if I sleep with 1 pillow, okay, I won't be able to sleep. Okay? So
then you say, okay.
Then this does not apply to you. The idea is that when that halacha was formulated, it was formulated as if you're used to a certain amount of comfort that you really don't need, then go without it on Tisha B'av. But if there's something that you really do need, even if our ancestors of previous generations would be horrified by how pampered we are. Oh, that's a good word. Pampered. Pampered is good because it doesn't have the negative connotations of istiness, that somebody's spoiled. But the idea is that it's not that I personally am sensitive. It's that we're all pampered. We're all used to certain things. Okay, so there are a bunch of halachot that that would seem to take that into account. And even I would venture to say, I wonder if anybody's put this all together. I'll have to check. Even I would venture to say the kind of halacha that doesn't get written down at all, but it's the kind where people come to ask their rabbi, Rabbi, I know the halacha is X, but in my case, such and such, does this still apply to me? The rabbi, a regular congregational rabbi who doesn't write tshuvot, but answers people's questions all the time, the rabbi might very well say, okay, so the halacha is not talking about you in this particular case. I mean,
I have a follow-up about the Rabbi Yaakov Emden thing, because what was interesting is the way he phrased it. He didn't use the word istinus. He's using a word that implies there's a certain delicacy of manner. But also I was thinking about, because specifically talking about this Homayim Macaroni thing with the hand washing, like we do wash our hands a whole lot more because there's less effort in it because we have running water in our house. I mean, even like 100 years ago, people were schlepping water. There are places in the world still people do this, where they're schlepping water miles a day.
Right.
So we don't preserve our water for something we need it for and not something we want it for. If we want water, we take it. So I'm like, I don't know. It just makes me feel like, okay, everybody should be doing it if you're going that way, because everybody expects to have clean hands these days.
Right. It's a good point. Standards of living are something that you get used to, but it's not a personal thing. So how about, here's another example with Tisha B'Av, the 9 days. You know, you're not allowed to bathe during the 9 days. Really? What if I shower every day? And if I didn't shower on a given day, I would feel disgusting. Am I still not allowed to shower during the 9 days? The answer is you are allowed to shower during the 9 days, but you're supposed to do it in a way that doesn't uh, maximize the comfort. You know, so if you're used to a hot shower, so take it a little bit cooler. But the idea is that the halacha is formulated as like, how often did people bathe? The Jews bathed more often than everybody else. They bathed once a week for Shabbat. So how difficult was it to go the 9 days without a bath? P.S. The halacha still says you're allowed to bathe for Shabbat.
Yeah.
Okay. So how hard was that in previous generations? Okay, so I'm not saying everybody's like this today, but for people where that really is the case, then you can make an excellent argument that it's clear from the way the halacha is formulated that it's applied differently. And this is, I would imagine that somebody has addressed these. I'll have to take a look to see. I mean, for sure, each area it's addressed in. The question is there anybody who's like pulled this?
An organized fashion.
Yeah, pulled this all together. You know, somebody who's sitting Shiva, but if they sat in the low chair provided by the Chevra Kadisha or etc. or whatever their low chair is, if it would the Gemach, if it would hurt their back, are they obligated to sit in that way if they will hurt their back? So presumably not. But I mean that would be the sort of thing probably on a case by case basis. A lot of it depends, you know. If the question is how absolute is a particular halacha, and that's why it really does have to depend on the category of halacha, because some halachot are more flexible than others, and that's the sort of thing that usually the congregational rabbi is more familiar with what the flexibility of a particular area of halacha is. Interesting. Okay, something to think about. Thank you for that. And so I'll just wrap it up and wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom, great week, happy learning, happy Shabbat food, etc., etc. See you next week. Take care.